Welcome to the RStudio lesson. In this lesson, you're going to learn how to download R, RStudio, and R packages. In addition, you're going to learn how to connect RStudio to Presto. In terms of versions, we're going to use R 4.0.2 and RStudio Desktop 1.3.1056. And with that, let's get started. First of all, let's install R. In order to use RStudio, you're going to have R installed on your computer. So let's do that first. In order to install R, let's open up a web browser. Next, enter the following URL, www.r-project.org. This should take you to the site where you can download R. Once you get to the page, click on the Download R link. Now select a mirror site. I'm going to scroll down and pick one that is close to me, which also happens to be from Carnegie Mellon. Since I'm using a MacBook Pro, I'll click on Download R for Mac OS X. Next, I selected the latest release. You see, I've tried multiple versions of R, and they seem to work with no problem. Clicking on this latest release package file should start the download process. Once the download is complete, double-click on it and follow the installation instructions. And with that, you now have R installed on your computer. Next, you have to install RStudio. As I mentioned earlier, RStudio will only work once you have R installed. And so, let's install RStudio. To do that, I'm just going to open up another tab for this web browser and go to www.rstudio.com. Once you get to the RStudio page, click on the download link. Once you get to the download page, scroll down and select the free version of the RStudio desktop. Click on the Download RStudio for Mac button. This should start the download process. What we end up downloading is a .dmg file. Once this file is downloaded, drag it into the Applications folder. And with that, you now have RStudio installed on your computer. Together with the R that we installed earlier, you should be able to write R code at this point. Now go to the Applications folder, look for RStudio, and double-click on it. This should launch RStudio. This pop-up essentially warns you that you're about to open up an app that was downloaded from the internet. We downloaded this from a legit site, so I'm not worried about this particular download. And so I'll just go ahead and click the Open button. I don't want to install the command line tools right now. I'll do that later, so I'll just click on Cancel here. Similarly, for the Enable Automated Crash Reporting pop-up, I'm also going to say no. These are both great things to install, but you could do that later. I personally like the DAC theme option of RStudio. So what I typically do is once I install RStudio, I go to the RStudio option on the top left, click on it, click on Preference, and then go down and click on Appearance and change that to Twilight. That should give me a DAC themed version. Let's increase the font to make it more visible. To do this, simply hold down the Command button. And while you're holding down the Command button, click on the plus button multiple times until you're satisfied. Next, let me show you how to connect Presto to RStudio. Once this is done, Presto will sit between your R code and the data. This will allow R to leverage the processing power of Presto to access the data, crunch the numbers, and then pass this result back to R for further processing. So let's just jump in and take a look at the file. This first line allows you to download the R Presto package. The next line allows you to load the DBI library. With this next section of the code, we set up the connection between R and Presto. If you notice, some of these elements are the same elements that we used when we tried the Presto CLI. You have the host name, but for the host name, instead of just localhost, you want to put HTTP here. If you don't do that, this code will not work. Next, we have port 8080. Then we set up the user, and I use teacher as the username. For schema, we have information schema, same schema we went into when we used the Presto CLI earlier. And for catalog, we use system here. Same catalog we looked into when we used the Presto CLI. So I've essentially done the same thing we did with the Presto CLI here, just to demonstrate that you can also access Presto using RStudio and R. Let's walk through the last 3 lines of code. The first line of code, dblist tables, essentially gives you the list of tables in this catalog and schema. The next line, dblist fields, gives you the list of columns for the tables table. To be clear, the tables table is just another table. There are other tables there. They just happen to call this one tables with an S. And finally, with the db-getQuery command, what we essentially are doing now is running the select command for the first 20 elements. Again, the same exact thing we did through the Presto CLI. And so we've demonstrated you can access Presto with RStudio or the Presto CLI. There are many other ways to access Presto. The next one we're going to look at is Tableau. We don't want to forget, let's first kick off the Presto server. One thing to keep in mind about these different clients like Tableau, Presto CLI, or RStudio is that they can only talk to Presto if you have the Presto server running. So don't forget to kick off the Presto server. Let's copy and paste this R script into a file in RStudio. You could do this by clicking on the top left button and selecting R script. Once the file opens, you can paste your script in there. I'm just going to scroll so you can see the pieces of code we just discussed in here. To run the script, highlight all the pieces of code that you want to run and click on Run. Let's examine the results. You can essentially see the same thing we saw with the Presto CLI. The dblist tables command gives you the list of all the tables. The dblist fields command gives you the list of all the columns for a table called tables. You can see the tables here in the list of tables. And now we list its columns. And finally, the db-getQuery command gives you a list of the first 20 rows of this table. And that's because we put a limit 20 here, just like we did when we used the Presto CLI. And so to conclude, in this lesson, you've learned how to download and install R, RStudio, and R packages. In addition, you've also learned how to connect Presto to RStudio and write code to talk to the data through Presto.